By the time I graduated high school, I realized I didn't like the natural sciences, and I decided that okay, I should do something I really like. But I didn't get the final offer, which made me a bit more obsessive about it because I really enjoyed the interviewing process and learning about case interviewing. In the beginning, you get an open field, which is a similar case to consulting, and we can integrate several interviews, which frees you up to do the second order critical thinking.
How is AI affecting consulting? How is the most interesting geographic market in consulting, the Middle East market, is evolving? And how is the real journey of trying to break into consulting, the initial struggle, the settling down, and then emerging on top? Today, we are going to discuss all these topics unfiltered, really deep, with someone who is not just familiar with these topics, but actually living these topics. So we are welcoming Hareth Ali from Doha office of Bain Company. So without further ado, let's jump into the discussion. Okay, so welcome Hareth. Welcome to Unfiltered by Being Consultant, where we really try and have very candid, from the heart conversations to consultants, ex-consultants, etc., trying to understand their journey, trying to understand the secret sauce of their success. So thanks a lot for investing time to share your journey and really guide the Being Consultant community and people beyond that. So thanks for being here.
Thank you for having me. I'm very happy to be here. And although I'm not sure I've found the secret sauce, but I'll try my best to share my experience and talk about my journey so far.
Great. Absolutely. And then let's start with that, right? Why don't you tell us about your journey so far?
Sure. So my name is Hareth. Usually I go by Hareth. I'm born and raised in Doha. In fact, I spent most of my life in Doha, and I did my university in Doha. I went to Georgetown, where I studied politics and economics. And my consulting journey started around my third year of university, when I started taking an interest in consulting and trying to apply. Then after graduating from university, I joined industry for 2 years, where first I joined a family office, then I moved to a consultancy in Dubai, and then finally I joined Bain and returned to Doha.
Okay. Interesting. And where did the thought of joining management consulting came from? What triggered that thought process?
It was a long journey, I think, of introspection, because I'm an IB student in high school, and I took high-level sciences, biology, physics, chemistry, with the aim of going to biology, maybe even computational biology. And by the time I graduated high school, I realized I didn't like the natural sciences, and I decided that okay, I should do something I really like. The problem is that I didn't have a crystallized career in mind. I didn't know what exactly I wanted to do. So I decided to go to university to study what I'm interested in, which was history and politics and economics. And I was hoping to figure out what I'm going to do throughout that journey in university. The first trigger was during the summer of my second year, where I was meeting with one of my friends, and he had an internship, and he seemed to be so busy, and I'd call him at 9 p.m., 10 p.m., he'd say he's still at the office. And I was really intrigued. I was like, you're a university kid. What are you doing?
What are you exactly doing?
Yeah. So I asked him, what are you doing? And he told me that he was doing an internship at PwC. And at that time, I never heard of consulting or PwC or any of that. And when he explained to me what he was doing, I was a bit incredulous because it sounded amazing. So this guy, who was my friend, my peer, he was working on some very interesting, sophisticated problems. He was talking to me about extreme visibility with very high senior executives. And Qatar is a very small community, so even these names were known to me. And I was very impressed that he was able to sit in a room with them and sometimes even present to them.
Right.
And I started researching and learning more about consulting. And the thing that attracted me the most was the idea that you get to work in dozens of industries within a consulting career. And that to me was amazing, because I was always ambivalent about the idea about choosing one career, because I was never sure about what I want to do. So this seemed like heaven. because I'm naturally curious. I had an intellectual curiosity about so many industries, and this seemed like a great opportunity to dabble in many things to find what my passion, and then maybe choose to specialize in that down the line. I started interviewing. In the beginning, I was doing fine. I made it to the second round with a couple of firms, but I didn't get the final offer, which made me a bit more obsessive about it because I really enjoyed the interviewing process and learning about case interviewing and case cracking. But there was a missing component. So I was very adamant about figuring it out. And I was practicing. I went into industry to gain some more skills and some exposure. And through that experience in these 2 years after uni, I was able to land an offer from Bain. And I've been with Bain for a little over a year and a half now. And so far, this has been one of the most enriching experiences of my life.
That's quite the interesting thing, right? So as we say, love at first sight. So like a love at first experience, right? You heard the experience of your almost right batchmate, right? And then you got dazzled by it. You explored more.
Yeah.
And the other thing also in the kind of struck me, which is when you did not get it, right? You were even more fascinated. Right. Again, human psychology, right? When we don't get something, we feel like, okay, now I want it even more badly. Right?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Great.
It's the law of scarcity, and consulting seems to attract high performance. And people who are used at excelling sometimes find this to be a challenge. But for me, it was energizing because it seemed like a puzzle. It seemed like something that others have solved it. So there must have been a path for me to find. And alhamdulillah, I figured it out at the end.
And we always say, right, that the consulting interview process is so peculiar, right?
Yeah.
And it is almost like kind of a smaller replica of the real world. And I always tell candidates that if you don't enjoy the case cracking practice, then you should rethink, because then you might not like consulting, right? So you enjoyed that process. And I remember we were also practicing and you were so enthusiastic about it. You also have that same experience, that that preparation and, in real consulting life, while taking a career decision, whether you are liking the preparation or not is one of the indicator.
Yes, absolutely. And preparing for consulting is a very important part of the journey. And we live at a time where there is a plethora of online resources and case books that are very informative about it. And that's where I started. It seemed like a very daunting task at the beginning, because the principle or the idea of the case interview is a very strange idea. You have people, like, for example, I come from a politics background, being asked about energy market entry strategies, It seemed very interesting that young people would be expected to come up with solutions for these highly technical and highly complex problems.
Right.
Reading the material, the cases were interesting, but the interviewing process was very challenging. I remember in the beginning, I would always get stuck. I would answer a few questions, maybe ask a few questions, and then I'm stuck in my tracks. And that was a very frustrating experience. But with practice, after getting over that hump, it was extremely rewarding, because then you get that fluency, and then it gives you this, I say, gratifying feeling, because you feel like, okay, I can solve any problem if I apply the same methodology. And this is the lesson I learned through my journey, where consultants are not necessarily hired for their knowledge or expertise. We're hired for our methodology. And the principle here is that a scientific approach to problem solving can be applied to any problem. And I think that's a superpower, and it's a toolkit that can serve you throughout your life if you pick it up.
Absolutely. There's no doubt about it. And in that entire journey, did you have time when you were demotivated, or you thought enough is enough, I'm not now, I'm just quitting, I'm not going ahead and interviewing with consulting firms? Did that happen? Anything demotivating, anything which made you give up or thinking about giving up?
No, because of course the rejections are disheartening at the beginning, and you question yourself, do I have it in me to even make it through this? Am I wasting my time? You get these questions. But what kept me really motivated was the fact that I was fortunate enough to have many consultants in my circle of acquaintances, and each and every one of them was an extremely impressive individual, and I could see that this is an environment that really shaped them, and I was really envious of that. I really wanted that for myself, because I was like, these people really are blossoming in this environment. And I felt like, okay, I need to figure out a way to get in there. And also throughout my peers and also online anecdotes, many people don't make it the first time around. And they keep trying, and it might take them years, and eventually they make it. And I've never heard anyone who's gone through this journey and eventually made it without them saying that it was worth it. So all of these dimensions were very encouraging throughout the process.
Absolutely. One hypothetical question, Hareth, which is, had you not gone into consulting, what other careers as plan B you were considering?
I was very attracted to law for a while. As I said, I'm a reader. I like reading. I like literature. I enjoy debating. That's what I did throughout my high school. I enjoyed the MUN and all these, let's say, rhetorical skill-based exercises. And also, law seemed to be a rewarding career because it has so many different specializations. And in the beginning, you get an open field, and eventually you can discover your niche and specialize in it, which is a similar case to consulting. So I was considering that seriously. And the second career would have been probably academics, because I enjoyed school and it seemed like a fail-safe. However, the problem with academics is that it's a highly regimented system where creativity has its place, but it's very much part of a larger ecosystem that really requires you to be a smaller participant within a whole, because the scientific community doesn't rely on sole contributors. They're just a part of a larger system. But nonetheless, it seemed interesting enough for me to consider it, and I would have probably chosen one of these two careers if consulting did not work out. Yeah.
I'm happy that it worked out. I think you got a very good consultant because of that.
Yeah.
Hopefully. Nice. So let's talk about now landing, right? So you had envisioned consulting, you fantasized consulting since the time you saw your friends doing internship, right? And now you landed, right? The first day, the first month, right? How was that landing experience? Was it crash landing? Was it smooth landing?
It was, I wouldn't call it a crash landing, but it was definitely a baptism by fire. And it was a very demanding experience in the beginning. So what I kept hearing during my interview process is that the case interview is a management consulting case writ small. And I had my doubts because I was like, surely they do something a lot more complicated, and I'm not sure this is going to help me down the line. So an early observation was that, we do work in a similar way to the case interview. There's story lighting, you define the problem, you create a hypothesis, and at Bain we have this principle of answer first, which is very much the principle you apply during your case interview. So I was given a sense of comfort that, okay, I have an idea about the general way they do things. However, when it came time to doing actually the work, it was extremely challenging for multiple reasons. Reason number one, consulting requires a fluency with a large number of tools, Excel, PowerPoint, data, and now AI tools and research tools. And also within the firm, there are many proprietary tools that takes you some time to learn and master. Secondly, compared to my other jobs, it had a higher level of ownership where you're given a task and you're expected to figure it out on your own with I would say minimal direction at the beginning to help you develop. And also what made it a blessing and a challenge was that the fact that I was paired with a very talented consultant. He was an IIT graduate and IIM graduate, and he was really brilliant, which made him a great coach, but also set the bar very high because he expected people to keep up with him and had to pick up the pace very quickly. But at Bain, we have a few guiding principles, and one of them is a Baini never lets a Baini fail. That came in very handy from the get-go, where I was assigned a buddy who would check on me every now and then. My consultant was extremely helpful, and I was pleasantly surprised to see that even the partners took an interest in me, and they would take a very keen interest in my development and my needs. So while it was demanding, they gave you all the tools to succeed, and they really wanted you to succeed. So it was a challenging one, but definitely not a hostile one at all.
You're right. Were there anything that you felt now looking back that these were myths and they got busted once you joined?
Yes, which is something I touched on just now. One myth is that it's a highly competitive, cutthroat environment and everyone is for himself and it's up and out and it's going to be a bloodbath. And I was prepared for that, but that was not the case at all. In fact, it was the least political environment compared to my other jobs, where the hierarchies seemed to be relatively flat, everybody was friendly, and everybody was collaborative. And you really felt that for the team to succeed, everybody had to pull his weight and everybody had to support everybody, because you can't afford to have laggards holding you back. So this was definitely one. Another one was the fact that it was an extremely unsustainable job. And it was daunting at the beginning because from the get-go, you hear about crazy hours, you hear about people working until 2 a.m. And I wasn't sure I was going to be able to do it because I've never done that before. And it is true that you have to work long hours, but it is sustainable nonetheless in a surprising way. Number one, you don't feel the time when you're that engaged. So when you're always communicating, when you're always working, when you're always collaborating with your colleagues, when you're doing interesting, engaging work, you don't feel the hours. And number two, there are so many mechanisms to make sure you don't burn out and to make sure you have a sustainable environment. For example, we have something called virtual pets, where at the beginning of the case, you set a few priorities for you during the week. They could be calling your family, could be having dinner with your wife every night, it could be going to the gym 3 times a week, whatever you want. You communicate them beforehand and they are always respected. And these are the things that enable you to survive. On top of that, we're entitled to an early night once a week. On top of that, we also get to have many case team events for morale and for you to have some room to let off some steam. And throughout the process, you feel really supported. So, and the hours really were not that big of a challenge.
Okay, right. I think, and one of the other guests also added a very interesting point that if you think from a perspective of one day, probably it is challenging, right? But if you just increase the span of time, right? And if you think about a year, right? Or there, then it doesn't feel unsustainable. Then because in consulting, unlike in industry, after one project and between the two projects, you have breather, right? So as long as you are able to plan well, right? It's possible.
And the key term here is planning, because one thing I've figured out is that if you need to take half a day off, you need to do an errand or go to a wedding or whatever, as long as you communicated like 2 weeks ahead of time, you can always honor that obligation. And the team will always be able to work around it. It's all about communication and planning.
Absolutely. And your first point was very interesting. I think this probably came in these conversations for the first time, right? That if you love the work, right, then that time you don't feel like you are having like a night out, or as long as you are surrounded by like-minded people and you know that they care for you, right? And the task is also something that is very involving, where your work is actually impacting the client, right, in a positive way. You are learning, right? So all these things, when they come together, then I think someone has said it, right? So once you start doing something that you like, then it's no more work.
Yeah.
So
yeah, like I remember during my first job, by the time it's 11, I'm counting the minutes until 12 for lunch. And after lunch, every 30 minutes, I'm like, okay, half an hour down, a couple of hours more to go, and 4 p.m. will not come any faster. And that was my experience every day. But now, like, it's a very common occurrence to like be surprised that it is 8 or 9 p.m. because you just did not feel the time at all. And it is exactly about doing something you enjoy and feeling very stimulated.
now that we are on this topic, Hareth, just want to broach this question about a day in a life of a consultant, right? And various guests have answered it in a various different ways, yeah. Because of course, as we all know, not every day is going to be different, right? Day is different than Friday, and strategy project and operations project, the days are going to be different. But however you find most useful for our listeners, right? Would you define a day in the life of a consultant?
So, as you said, it varies. I think the primary factors would be what type of case it is and what are the requirements of the case. Also, what phase of the phase are you in? And to a lesser degree, what day of the week it is. So in my experience, the earlier days of the week are usually for planning and setting up the week for production. Middle of the week is for deep work. And usually towards the end of the week, we either do presentations to the client or submissions or final deliverables or preparing something for Sunday or Monday next week. And the day usually starts the same way. It starts usually with a morning huddle where the entire team comes together and we discuss our plan. And there are different management styles. Some managers are extremely prescriptive, and during that first half an hour, you would know exactly what you're going to do for the next 11 hours. While others are more flexible and they talk more in broad terms, and it's up to you to figure out your way around it. And usually after the morning huddle, you clear your email, you answer any emails you get from last night, and usually you invest in the first part, collecting data or information. So you might do some secondary research. Maybe you'll do an interview with an expert. And these expert interviews are very important because it's a very reliable source of data and it's not usually readily available online sometimes. And you take all of this information you get, and sometimes you even have client meetings in the morning, in the first half of the day. And then you synthesize all of that data in the second half of the day. And that's where you do your slide production. That's where you do your financial modeling. And that's where you basically do your second order thinking, where you try to delve deeper into addressing the problem at hand. And then towards the end of the normal workday, maybe around 4, 5, 6 p.m., you'll have another huddle where there'll be a review of what you've done, and there will be an assessment of what needs to be accomplished by the end of the night. And then we plan accordingly and break off. Mm-hmm. And this period after this final huddle varies a bit because some people choose to take a couple of hours to go to the gym or take a nap or meet their family, and then they return to their job. And then we push until the assigned work is done. And we usually close by the time the work is done by sending a summary email of exactly what we've done and maybe preparing the agenda for tomorrow's morning huddle. And then we close for the evening.
Okay. That's interesting. I picked up the initial part where you said there are certain managers which are more prescriptive and some of them are little bit, they'll let you do your things, right? And so sometimes the prescriptive one helps. Sometimes I think the other personality helps, doesn't it?
Yes, I agree. And I think for development, it's necessary to have a balanced mix of both. So highly prescriptive managers really teach you to focus on tactical things because they give you the strategy. They tell you where we need to go. And you devote all of your energies to figuring out where to go from there. And this is a very important skill because it's very communication heavy. It means that you have to be very good at collecting instruction and organizing them and making sure you have a good ability to translate them into work. And it's also beneficial when it's in your early career when it's a highly technical case and your supervisor is an expert in that field. And in that case, they do know better, and it's very useful to just pick up that best practice from them rather than you stumbling and figuring it out on your own. Another thing, at all stages of life and throughout different careers, you will always have to answer to superiors and you'll have to meet their expectations in a very demanding environment. And prescriptive managers help you sharpen that skill because they have very precise expectations and you have to really be aware of how to meet these expectations all the time. The other type of managers who are flexible help you develop more strategic skills. For example, storylining, storyboarding. I mean by storylining and storyboarding, the fact that when you create a presentation loop, it's not just a random set of slides and it's not an information dump. It has to tell a story. Right. And that is it's an art and a science because it's a very elusive skill because it has so many components that go into it. Some of them are very technical. Some of them are more soft and interpersonal. So having a manager who just tells you, I just want a market research on this topic and letting you go helps you think in a very structured way because he does not give you the structure and it has to emanate from you. And this is a very important skill that you will have to master as you move into supervisory roles and you're expected to provide structure to your supervisees. And another thing, a very important soft skill, I think, in consulting is resourcefulness and being able to figure things on your own. And a flexible manager who doesn't give you highly prescriptive instructions gives you this freedom to go and experiment and figure out how to do it and try to your best to get a solution within the time bound. And lastly, I think the flexible consultant manager also helps you develop your time management skills, because not having these guardrails of exactly what to do and by when forces you to think critically about, okay, what can I do to make sure I can meet this deadline? And this applies a principle called 80-20, which is prevalent in consulting. And it's the idea that 80% of the output could be attributed to 20% of the input. So logically, a skilled consultant should focus on that 20% high impact tasks and devote most of their energy there, rather than doing things that are not necessarily answer changing. And that is also a very core consulting skill that you can pick up from this type of management.
Prioritization, then storylining, absolutely, resourcefulness. So,
what type of manager did you used to be?
I used to be. I think in my case, I would say the leadership style of or my leadership style probably was quite flexible depending on what needs to be done, right? At the start of the project, and if there is a breather, I would always give people time to try their own things, right? Because as you rightly pointed out, in consulting environment, we are trying to create the next set of leaders, right? Who will in the project be more independent and resourceful, then so that your time also gets freed up for strategic thinking, right? In McKinsey, I think the word for that was problem leadership. Can you develop a problem leadership? Can you develop independence? Can you, kind of take the problem and run with it without the superiors, that prescription, right? So, yeah, I mean, if there's time and the flexibility possible, I would be that manager, which is a little bit more giving independence, right? But then there are certain mandates where we need things in a particular way. There are mandates where there's no time. For example, private equity due diligence, right? Where sometimes it's a 1 day engagement, sometimes it's 7 day engagement, and definite set of things are needed, right? There, I cannot give people creative liberty or freedom, right? So depending on project types, so depending on urgency, I would say, and sometimes also depending on what my boss is operating from, right? Because if someone else is also on top of me, very prescriptive, right? I need to ensure that the outcome from my below as well comes in that shape and form. So I think what in fact consulting has taught me is, you need to be ready to deploy different leadership styles, as the different situations are thrown at you. You cannot say, okay, that I'm a micromanager, I'm not a micromanager. Sometimes you have to be a micromanager, but sometimes you have to give them, freedom to be creative. So yeah, I think in my case, I hope my juniors can tell you whether I was effective or not. But yeah, I tried my best.
I'm sure you were from talking to you, which reminds me of an anecdote. I think we discussed it earlier about my previous case, that the one I just finished, where I had a manager who was rather like you, where he was very flexible and he gave us a lot of rope and a lot of creative freedom and let us run loose. And I'm sure aspirants who are watching this know that there are different seniority levels in consulting. And usually it works like a ladder. So you have a junior consulting taking the first pass at producing content. Then he moves it up to a consultant who gives comments, maybe edits directly, then to a manager, then to an associate partner, to a partner. And that's how it usually goes. This case, for reasons outside of our control, did not have many people between my level and the associate partner level. So these different screens that refine and figure.
Your level being consultant level, right?
I'm an associate consultant.
Yeah. I'm at a broad level, basically.
Yes.
Right. Yeah. So there was a manager layer missing the entire from the pyramid in this case. Yeah.
Exactly. So this presented two problems. Problem number one, you don't have this middle manager who tells you what to do and gives you guidance, so you have to figure it out on your own. And number two, you don't have that filtration that screen to pick up your mistakes and fix your deliverables and make sure that they're presentable. So you have to drive your own work stream, and you have to make sure it's a finished product. Not only because your manager in this case is a very senior guy, but usually these senior people have multiple cases going on and they have firm related duties, and despite their willingness to help you, they just don't have the time or the luxury to babysit. And I'm very grateful for this experience, because out of all the cases I've done, that has been the case where I learned the most and I've gained the most self-mastery. And it helped me also feel a lot more comfortable in my role at the firm. And it made the job even more enjoyable, knowing that I can swim in my own.
Absolutely. I remember I had created one of the video a couple of years back about what are the projects on which you should not be staffed in first 3 months, right? And one of that being, directly working with principal or partner, because I strongly feel that first 2-3 project, you need a manager in between, right? Someone who can take or soften the blows from above, right? At the same time can give you a very detailed feedback on first few artifacts. You can imagine as a rookie, some of the first few artifacts are really, now if you think about it, we will laugh at it, right? So
yeah,
we need someone in between to do that, and I think managers do an amazing job, no doubt about it. That leads me to a kind of a light question. So, do you remember any special, any interesting, any funny rookie mistake that you did, which you would like to share?
I've done so many. Like, I'm trying to think of which one comes to mind, but most likely, so I was asked to do a financial model, and it was relatively simple. However, it required a lot of raw data to be incorporated into it. And I worked really hard on it, and I made sure that it worked out well and the answers were correct. And I double, triple, quadruple checked my model, and I was very proud of that model. And as soon as I submitted it, immediately, before my manager was even going through the answer, he told me that this is unacceptable and I have to revise it. And I was taken aback. I was like, what? I did it perfectly like this. And what I did not know at the time was these models have to be more versatile in the sense that they should be easy for your manager to audit, and they should be client ready and presentable to be sent as a deliverable, which meant some technical things that I did not know about. For example, using conditional coloring and coding to make sure you can differentiate between what is hard coded and what is not hard coded, and what is an assumption and versus what's a number you got from the client directly, etc. So I had to fix that. Another problem was, although my formulas were correct in my assessment, they were maybe 4 or 5 lines long and very complicated and almost impossible for my manager to audit. And this did not occur to me because I thought the answer is what mattered. But one lesson here was that it has to be efficient. It's not okay to get the answer. You have to make it in an efficient way, not only for people to audit it, but also for you to make sure you can minimize your mistakes, and to solve for simplicity, to make it sure it's an agile document that could be edited and changed very easily. And the last problem or mistake was that I looked at the data and I hard-coded it in the model and I just called it a day. While the correct way to go about it is to import all of the raw data into the model into a different sheet and to connect it using formulas to make sure that these references are consistent and to minimize mistakes. At Bain, the parlance is ZD. We call it zero defect. So ZD means a mistake, and you're expected to have zero defect work. And it's very hard for your manager to audit your work if you hard code everything. So
yeah, absolutely.
That was it, on case one.
No, that's interesting. It reminds me of something similar, and me also learning the lesson that the Excel model should always have a sheet which is the output sheet, which is almost like a PPT equivalent of Excel, right? That is where only those things that clients so what needs to come out, right? There needs to be an engine as a second one, and then there needs to be inputs, right? So literally, one is getting the right answer, right? Second is making it modular, right? Thinking from the perspective of ultimately it needs to be handed over to the client, right?
Yeah.
For them to implement your recommendation or suggestion, they should be understanding your logic. Yeah.
Right.
And that's why I think it needs to be made so much simpler so that it's easier to understand. Assumption sheets separated up, right? So all these things, color coding you talked about. So yeah, thanks for that example. So from the rookie days, as you went into your consulting career, Harith, one question, just from a feelings perspective, your emotions perspective, when did you start feeling that now you belong here? This is my place.
This is a complex and layered question because on one level, from day one, on another level, maybe recently over the last 2 months, and on a third level, not yet. So from day one, I felt really at home because it was an extremely diverse office. You have people from all around the world, people are extremely welcoming, and people take a real interest in you, which is very pleasant. They really want to know your story, they want to know your interests, they want to see you outside the firm. It was a very hospitable environment, and you feel like you belong from day one in that sense. The second layer is feeling that you are made for the job and you can do the job well. And at the beginning, I think it's an expectation that the vast majority of people will have some challenges in the beginning, and that's expected at your tenure. However, as I said earlier, consulting attracts superstars and people who are used to performing at a respectable level throughout their careers, or high school or university. So coming to an environment where you feel like an underachiever and you feel like you're surrounded with people who are brilliant and ahead of you could be a bit demoralizing and make you question yourself and make you question your fitness to be among this cohort.
Absolutely.
And this is a feeling that I carried for a long while because I always felt like I needed to work harder and to catch up to my peers. And recently, I started feeling more comfortable as I started to gain more confidence in my skills and my ability to meet expectations at this level. At the third level,
I
thinking,
will say recently, just for the context of the audience, we are talking about probably after 2 years.
yeah,
Okay.
yeah. So it takes a minute. And at the third level, thinking of consulting as a career, as a long-term home for you. When I look up to, let's say, the senior managers or even the partner level, I see extremely competent, extremely well-rounded, impressive individuals. And I still don't feel like I am there yet. And I'm not sure I will be able to make it in time, but I have every faith in the system because although sometimes it doesn't feel like a possibility, everyone around you tells you and reassures you that this is part of your growth. And the system is designed in a very intelligent way and it's very invested in your development. And you will get there if you just apply yourself. So although I intellectually accepted at an emotional level, I still don't feel like I belong within that group yet.
Yeah. But that's probably also what keeps you hungry, right? And you have had amazing run, very fast growth, but still you are saying this means I think it's about the hunger, right? You
Yes.
want to improve, you want to get even better. I'm sure
Yeah.
it will happen. Let's talk about the struggle, probably. Yeah. So last 3 years, is there any incidents or is there any kind of a phase of time, right, which you want to highlight as you really struggled over there and come out of it?
I would think to a particular case. This is a case in a different country, so it was a travel case, and would go to the client site. And I was excited about this case because this is a very large regulatory body. The government decided to break it into smaller bodies with more specialized jurisdictions. And we were mandated to create the governance structure and the operating procedures and the reporting lines for all of these smaller organizations. And we're talking about things from how customer complaints are handled to how serious problems that have national ramifications are communicated to senior stakeholders. So it was a very broad mandate. And within it, I was assigned to a work stream that was extremely detail oriented because you would have over 20 different departments that have to communicate with each other. And you would have, for each procedure, maybe 20 to 30 documents assigned to them. And you'll have to create a process map for how these documents talk to themselves and how they integrate with each other. And it was a very fast-paced case. So I was expected to carry a lot of my own weight. And I would work hard and I would create the process flow and I would assign documents and stakeholders and submit it. And I would always be told that I've made quite a few mistakes. And some of them were negligence, like forgetting the name of a document or misnumbering something. Sometimes there were logical issues where I didn't quite think through a certain logical loophole or problem that could emerge. And it was extremely demanding because it was extremely detail-oriented and it required a lot of critical thinking and what-if analysis in your brain. Not exactly mathematical. You cannot really model it. You have to really ask yourself, if this happens, then what? If this happens, then what? Whatever. And it took me like weeks to get my footing. And it only worked when I started to take more time to delve deeper into the material, which really extended my work week by quite a lot, maybe added a third to my hours. But I realized that I'm the type of person that if I try to work on a superficial level, I'm prone to making mistakes because I don't have that intuitive understanding of what these different components mean. I need to really read them and understand them to get a sense of how they integrate with each other, and therefore I could be able to assign them properly. So the first approach was just mimicking my manager, who was more comfortable at it. But I realized that I had to take a more nuanced approach and to become even more familiar with the material to make sure I don't make these mistakes. Of course, that required a small sacrifice in terms of time. But at the end, I think it was worth it after I was able to overcome that. And thank God, I think I got a good review at that case and I consider it a success at the end.
Very interesting. So this is like out of your comfort zone in many ways, right? And you had to, and in midway in the case, you had to change your approach on how you would go about it. Absolutely. And I think these are the things which, if you think back, make you grow, right? As a person, as a professional, right? So now that facet of professional life also you have seen. So now you know next time it comes to you, this kind of a challenge. And that's, I think, an amazing part of consulting as a career. So if you do 10 projects, 10 projects will teach you 10 different things, right? Probably have different things. And you go in those 20 directions, which is an amazing beauty of consulting. A lot of people say that in last 2-3 years, consulting has changed significantly, right? So have you seen consulting changing? I mean, call it AI or any other trends that you see have changed, or how has it changed for you?
It's an interesting question. What really comes to mind, the impact of AI and needing to adjust our broader market approach to respond to the economic landscape we live in right now. So when it comes to AI, I joined at the beginning of this revolution and I really saw the change because from my first case, it looks very different than this case. Because in my first case, I don't think I've used AI even once. Today, I think I...
First case in the sense in 2022, right?
23.
23. In 23, not even one time you used.
Not even once.
Not even the free ChatGPT, nothing.
Nothing. It didn't even occur to me. It wasn't part of the conversation. Today, it's a daily tool. And some people might fear that it could be a substitute for actual critical thinking and that you're outsourcing your brain to a machine. But it's not quite like that exactly because it's a productivity tool. And it's an enhancer for your productivity and it helps you to do more with less. So this is a huge expectation, and not only tools that are available online for free use, but there have been an explosion of proprietary tools within the firm ecosystem, where we have tools for extremely small, specific tasks. Like, for example, we have an AI tool for writing taglines. Just writing the title of a slide, which might seem frivolous to some people, but it's an extremely important part of the slide.
Absolutely. Action titles is so important in storylining. Yeah.
Exactly. So we have tools that go down to that level, and also leveraging AI to do even more primary research, which was a limitation in the beginning. Because I remember at the beginning, I used to take extremely detailed verbatim notes from expert interviews, which made them a bit slower, and they had to really account for making sure that we get all the information. And it was much more painful than today. Today, with AI tools, we have automatic transcripts. We have filters that screen for key insights and key takeaways. We have things that are flagged to us immediately as noteworthy and to focus on. And we can integrate several interviews without having to go into the transcript yourself and to do the manual work and everything, which frees you up to do the second order critical thinking, where you think about the so what beyond the insight, and to really package it into an actionable directive for your client. So AI is making a revolution, and it's a terrifying thing because it's unknown how much it will impact us. For the time being, I don't think it will replace consultants. If anything, I think it will make consulting work more interesting. And maybe we're going to see smaller engagements where you have smaller teams and maybe even more compressed timelines to produce the same amount of work. And maybe that could be a direction in the near term. And beyond that, who knows? But I don't think it's anything to be worried about. If anything, I think it's going to be a boost for the consulting industry. On another dimension, beyond the case at the firm level, part of the Doha office, and Qatar emerged from an economic boom after the World Cup. And now things are slowing down and coming back to normal. And in the meantime, we have a huge growth in the Saudi market, driven by PIF and National Vision 2030 and the associated programs that have emerged from that. So our firm had to adjust its strategy a little bit, where for the first time, we're pursuing more private sector clients in Qatar, which is a new thing because usually there were very few of them locally, number one. And number two, most of them were not able to afford premium consulting.
Yeah, I was going to say that.
Yeah.
But they are not there where who can afford MBB.
Absolutely not. But I had the good fortune to work on 2 private sector cases in the last year, which was unheard of 3 or 4 years ago, where all the clients were government clients in the country. But now we have private sector clients that are becoming more educated about the utility of consultants, and now they see value in getting premium consultants. And number 2, the market is becoming more competitive and starting to shrink. And these firms are forced to think in more strategic terms, to think about their growth beyond the borders of the country, and to think about really creative ways to survive and compete, which drives them towards seeking out consultants, which is a new revolution here. And on the Saudi front, you have extremely ambitious programs with very large mandates, which really energized the firm. And now we have a very large presence in Saudi. Our main firm, our headquarters is meant to be in Saudi now. And even the pay scale has shifted towards Saudi, where a junior consultant in the Doha or Dubai office should expect to be paid anywhere between 80, 90,000. Of course, it differs.
USD, right?
USD, yes.
Yeah.
And of course, it changes from firm to firm, but this is like. But in Saudi, a junior consultant could get maybe $120,000 to $135,000 a year.
That's almost 30-40% higher, huh?
It is. And this is to attract talent to Saudi. And it's a huge signal that the Saudi market is a real bellwether and a real anchor for the consulting industry right now in the GCC. And with that, we have new practices that have started to emerge. For example, there have been very large sports-related mandates, which were very scarce before that.
Yeah.
We have heavy industry mandates. For example, I worked in a very large steel case, and it was driven by the National Vision because in the past, they used to get all of their raw materials from abroad. But now under the new vision, there's a drive towards localization.
Absolutely.
How can a large multi-billion-dollar company localize its entire supply chain within a few years to remain competitive for public sector bids? It's a very interesting problem, very ambitious case. And this is the type of new cases that are emerging, because in the past, people used to do government transformation or do PMO, which is basically labor augmentation for ministries and more, let's say, commoditized types of services. But now we're emerging to a new much more creative and much more ambitious in a consulting environment right now.
That's very, I mean, this is very interesting and superb time to come, no doubt about it. Absolutely. The one area that you touched upon, sports, right? And I'm hearing so much about it now. So I know some of the top consulting companies have started new practices in sports investment. A few of my mentees also have joined or got transferred into these practices. What's happening in the Middle East? The sports in fact, I don't think even some of the in Western countries we had something called as sports as a practice, but in Saudi and I think in Qatar, suddenly sports teams are becoming big. What's happening?
So the GCC is very aggressive and very bullish when it comes to sports. Qatar is world renowned now because of hosting the World Cup.
Right.
Before the World Cup, us people from Qatar, when we travel to, let's say, Sweden, you'd have to say, I'm from Qatar, it's next to Dubai. But now, you can actually say, I'm from Qatar, and people would know what you're talking about. All thanks to the PR that we got from the World Cup and the visibility we gained, which points at the first motivation for these countries to invest in sports, is to get more visibility and to improve their brand and use it as a soft power tool to launch themselves into the international arena and to make sure that they are seen as viable and respectable players at the international scale. And they bring a lot of prestige and a lot of good publicity to the country. Number two, we live in a hydrocarbon industries based economies in the GCC. And there is a time limit to how far this can go, and we need to diversify beyond that. Diversification is focusing in many industries. Chief among them is tourism. And I suspect that the reason for this is the immense success of Dubai's experiment, where Dubai became an international mecca for tourism and has attracted a lot of foreign direct investment and a lot of tourism money just by having that brand, and proved that it could be a viable model, because now Dubai is economically independent almost from hydrocarbons and can sustain itself. So all of these countries, Qatar, Saudi, etc., they're trying to attract more tourism through their hosting of large tourism-related sports events. And lastly, they're using it as an infrastructure and private sector catalyst, because hosting one large mondial or sports event doesn't mean just inviting people to play in a field and maybe building a stadium. It involves building infrastructure, it involves building public transportation networks, new buildings, new facilities, improvements to the airport to handle increased flows. And it has a cascading impact on the entire economy. And it stimulates it really. And the governments are really interested in that. And it really solves for problems around oil shocks when government spending would otherwise go down. But these anchor events make sure that spending keeps pouring in. So what consultant companies have done, they have adjusted to this new environment where they are advising these countries on a national level to do these sport events at a strategic level. But also, there are so many projects that are being born out of this sports drive. For example, in infrastructure or in even banking to support these emerging industries in sports.
And that's very interesting. Apart from AI, apart from sports that we spoke about, any other trends that you think aspiring consultants should be aware of in consulting general, not just in Middle East, but overall or in Middle East? Anything else that you think is worth mentioning?
Trying to think. Like one thing noteworthy, I would say, is the movement towards more of an international staffing model, where we're seeing a rising trend of cases being staffed by international teams for many, many different reasons. Reason number one, there are new types of customers who are emerging in the GCC for premium consultants, and these are more ambivalent, they're more skeptical, they're smaller scale. For whatever reasons, they don't have the purchasing power of large governments. So the teams have to be staffed in a very intelligent way to make sure they have the right expertise, yet remain affordable to the end client. And here we have seen a new trend where staffing happens from offices around the world, where the consulting staff are more affordable to the end client, and the teams are created through a merging between local consultants and international consultants. Number two, we have new industrial and economic ambitions in the GCC that are giving birth to new industries. For example, automotive industry in Saudi Arabia, which was unheard of 10 or 15 years ago, in the GCC. Now we have two large car manufacturers in Saudi, and they're really aggressive about localizing their manufacturing there. And this type of expertise and consulting know-how needs to come from abroad. And we have so many different industries where people have to come from abroad to inseminate the teams, to enrich them, to make sure that they can deliver at the best practice level by importing from other more mature markets. So this is definitely a new trend, I think.
Okay. How about the sustainability angle, ESG?
That is definitely an emerging angle. And I've worked on one ESG case. And it was a very interesting case, actually, because the ESG environment in Qatar is not on the GCC as a whole, is not that mature from a regulatory perspective and also from a practical implementation perspective. So we need to have a lot of know-how advising governments on what standards to implement and how to monitor them and how to assess them and how to integrate them into their national long-term visions. And also advising clients on how to be compliant to these emerging regulations and to anticipate them so they can prepare ahead of time before they actually become a compliance requirement, but for them to make sure that they're in place to do it. And also from an investment perspective, a lot of investment firms and investment funds follow ESG marked investment assets. So you have companies in the GCC, for example, public companies that want to attract international funding that are interested now in having high ESG scores and certifications to make sure that they look as attractive as possible to international funders. So from different angles and for different reasons, ESG is here to stay. It's emerging. And it's a very promising market for consulting in the GCC.
Interesting. Okay, cool. So last couple of questions, Hareth. Won't hold you back for a lot more time. One question that I always love to ask, if you have to, or if you get a chance to change one career decision or one decision in your professional life, what would you change? What would you do differently?
It's a very good question. And I have a couple of things in mind. One thing is seek more international cases. The firm, Bain, offers you many opportunities to get experience abroad, either doing travel cases in the region or doing a strategic transfer to a different office or do an experience or externship somewhere else to even go to a different industry to expose yourself to something new. And I don't think I've availed myself of that enough yet. Throughout my career, I've had only one travel case outside of Qatar. And it's definitely on my bucket list going forward because the stories I hear of people coming back, very interesting because they all talk about how rewarding it is and how much of an enriching environment it is, both culturally and professionally. And it's a huge perk of working in consulting, and I think I should have taken more advantage of that. The other thing, I joined consulting a couple of years after university. And I think looking back, I could have joined earlier and triggered my consulting career earlier if my approach to interviewing and prepping was different. So starting with the way I pursued interviews, it was slightly flawed because I think I did not follow best practice when it came to formatting my CV. I just did it based on what I thought looked best. And my applying was a bit sporadic. It wasn't very targeted and it wasn't super invested in one firm. It was more of a shotgun approach, which I think could work for some people. But I think also having high priority targets and focusing your energy on them could yield some very positive results. Another, I think, mistake, and I think it's a common mistake because I hear other people having similar experiences, is doing too much at once. Because at some point I was studying for my CFA, I was studying for my GMAT so I can go to grad school. I was doing a bunch of random certifications. I was studying like crazy in my free time. All of this to prepare me for a career in consulting. And while I think the knowledge I gained is definitely useful and I do use it every day, but that amount of effort could have been more productive had it been focused at the right places. And lastly, I used to read interview guides and case books and practice with my friends and call it a day. And I think that was not ideal because the feedback I got throughout that journey was a bit minimal. Having a learning a program that is very heavily tilted towards extensive feedback, I think is the best way to get better at case interviews. And had I done that, I think I could have been successful in my earlier attempts.
I remember our first case, so I can relate to that. Yeah, absolutely. And I think with so much information out in the market, right? And so many people, so many guides, so many tools pulling you towards them. Yeah, it's sometimes you could get on a longer route. Yeah. So last question with which we will, and unless of course you want to add something, is now that we are on the other side of the table, right? And quite almost 3 years into consulting, an MBB that too, right? Where probably the average tenure is less than 2 years. What's your advice to people who are trying to get into consulting, right? And just to kind of give you a little bit of guidance on the way, I would love to hear the answer. As you know, in being consultant, we not only focus on interview preparation, but I feel career clarity, yeah, is equally important, right? Joining consulting for right reasons, right? So the clarity part, interview prep, you already spoke about, but happy to understand more. And also the excellence part, that's the settling down part, right? Along these, if you have any advice for the aspirants.
Yeah. I think a good point of departure that everybody should focus on is to expand their network as much as possible and to find as many current, former, or aspirant consultants, get to know them, because each and every one of these contacts has something to add to you and has something to contribute to your journey. And collecting mentors and role models throughout the journey is a very important part of leading up to consulting and going through the consulting career. And I want people to really think about investing a lot of energy into sustaining that. And number two, which comes from my own personal experience, is to never lose heart. Many people are successful from their first attempt, but some people have to try 2 or 3 or even 4 times until it clicks. And like within the firm, there are dozens of examples of people who made it a little bit down the line, but it still worked out for them. And that tenacity is very important. And if you don't have that tenacity and that thick skin, it will be a challenge to get through consulting, which leads me to another point about being prepared to have very thick skin when you become a consultant, because it's an extremely performance-based and critical environment where every word you say, every number, every punctuation, every gesture gets evaluated, and you will hear something about it.
Scrutinized.
It will be extremely scrutinized, and you have to be very comfortable accepting that constructive criticism and to have a can-do attitude to really not take it to heart, but to make sure that they translates into growth for you. And lastly, I would say at the beginning or for early consultants, I think investing in breadth could be very beneficial, because consulting, especially when you start at a junior level, you will discover that it's an everything skill. It's about your ability to debate. It's ability to tell good stories. It's about your ability to organize yourself, manage your time, do research, manage online tools, do financial modeling, be quick on your feet when it comes to problem solving, all of that. So picking up any skills will have some applicability in your career, and people should widen their horizons in the beginning and to not focus too much on hyper specialization, because as very young junior consultants, having that breadth, I think, is more valuable.
So you start being broad and then slowly, classical consulting career path, right? That if you can take, that would be so much more, useful, so much more rewarding than, specializing from day one. Absolutely. Great. Harith, thanks a lot for all your perspective. I think it was super candid, directly coming from your heart, and so many value bombs you shared with us. Thanks a lot for your time. And I think everything that we spoke about, right, for the last 90 minutes, I think all these golden nuggets are going to be super useful to every consulting aspirants. And that is the intention of, in fact, starting this podcast, right? So humans typically take decisions based on other human beings who have been there and done that. Yeah. And you having gone through the journey just 2-3 years back means everything that you have shared resonates so much to people who are in, at this point of time in a similar journey. So thanks a lot. And of course, all the best wishes from my side, from all the our Being Consultant community side for your consulting career.
Thank you so much for having me. I enjoyed our chat, and I look forward to hearing more about your progress with being consultant. And to the community and everyone listening, I'm easy to find online. So if you want to reach out, please don't hesitate, and I'll be happy to chat.
Great. Thanks a lot for that offer. And great. Have a nice weekend.
You too. Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye.